Before we start today, I gotta let you in on the upcoming Stablecoins Unblocked. It's the premier stablecoin event in the UK and it's happening in London July 1st. BlockTalks listeners get a cool discount by signing up with the link on the show notes. See you there! In the 203rd BlockTalks, we speak with Adriana Ennab, Director of Standard Crypto UK and Europe, to understand how advocacy drives blockchain adoption. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is BlockDrops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption, and are meant for educational purposes only. All right, everybody, I'm here with Adriana Ennab, who's going to tell us who she is and what she does with blockchain. Adriana, welcome to BlockTalks.
Oi Maurizio, tudo bem? Muito obrigado pelo convite para o seu podcast.
Look at that. She's killing it in Portuguese.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Cool. It's good that we can catch up. We've met a few years ago. You really went in to crypto since we met, and I would love to hear that story. But let's start before that. How did crypto make it into your life, or how you ran into crypto?
Well, I'm going to start. I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it's quite long, but I'm going to start. I started in finance when I was 17, a freshman in university, and I ended up going to school full-time, undergraduate and graduate school. I'm working at Goldman and became a trader in capital markets, fixed income. So I come from a long line of TradFi. So I was Goldman, then Merrill, I was New York, London, Tokyo, and then at Credit Suisse in policy. So when I was at Credit Suisse, I'd taken some time off work raising kids, and I lived in Asia, and I was doing an art degree as well, as because I seem to quite like torturing myself and getting and going back to school. And I went back in a return program at Credit Suisse, and I went to the policy side. One of the first things I said was, this doesn't make sense for me because I'm not a lawyer. When I left banking, when I left finance, we had no regulations. I didn't know what MiFID was. I had never heard of EMIR, but the woman who ran the department said, I need someone who understands finance, who understands cap markets. I have enough lawyers, I have enough people that come from the regulatory side. She said, give me 3 months. If you don't like it, we'll find you something else. I was there 10 years. So I started off with EMIR and margin and securitization, and MiFID, different things like that. And then in an ESMA consultation in 2015, I read something mentioning blockchain, and I thought, okay, well, that's got to be the only thing I know about blockchain is Bitcoin, and why would ESMA be talking about money laundering and arms dealing? So there's got to be something else. So I started to do research and look into it, and I went down rabbit holes, which I often do, and was blown away knowing the market, understanding the infrastructure issues we had. And it was fantastic when I was trading. It was great, but there were a lot of frictions. It was slow, fine at the time, but in hindsight, you could see. And when I read what blockchain could do and understood, I knew it was a game changer. I went to the board. I talked to management. I said, we need to get on board with this straight away. This changes everything. And everyone's like, probably not going to take off, not that important, not that innovation friendly. And I just sort of kept working on it and talking to people, talking about how the financial crisis would have been not as severe, in my opinion, 2007, 2008, if we'd been on the blockchain, because a lot of the issues that we had with securitized products. Funnily enough, I've to this day continued to do moderating panels and talking to senior people in industry at top banks and mentioning this to them, and they're like, we don't know what you mean. We don't understand what it's like. I don't understand how you don't get that, because literally, and maybe it's because they're more on the innovation side and weren't on the, on the cap market side. But, part of the problem was not knowing what's inside the securitized products. So if you had a combination of blockchain and AI together, mind blowing, you would know what was in there. You would be able to set up smart contracts. You could see what was happening, what the ratings were, if they dropped, everything else. So I just then started following that path. But I covered, in addition to tax securitization margin, I covered all the digital products. So that was AI, data, blockchain, digital assets, which was something we weren't really that keen on getting involved in, and said not something that we will ever do at Credit Suisse. My point was we are a high net worth bank, high net worth, individual bank, and our clients will have crypto assets. So we need to be aware of what that means and how we value them and what we look at their positions. And we need to be sitting at the table. So I talked to AFME. We set up a working group. I talked to ESMA and said, we need some sort of regulations that are cross border, because at that point, France was quite advanced and they had licensing for fintechs and different and for digital assets. Malta, everybody was different. A lot of regulatory arbitrage. The big players were not going to get involved. They was not going to scale unless there was some sort of a regulation that they could feel comfortable with, and where the customers were protected and the bank was protected. So I was always pushing for a regulation, which seems sort of the antithesis of what you would think somebody in policy would do. But I always understand how important regulation is to ensure that consumers are protected, but to not over-regulate. So, where's that sweet spot? So I started working with the regulators to get this in place. This was pre-MiCA. And then now, as you know, we have MiCA. So so that brought me to digital assets, was the blockchain and the TradFi side, to understand how important that was. Then very interested in financial inclusion. I started working on digital identity as well. And at that time, probably 1.2 billion without an identity. Now, I think something like 900 million, and we're not collecting enough data for artificial intelligence because we don't have identities. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's intertwined. And of course, when you have digital assets, you have cryptocurrency brings this helps with financial inclusion. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's wrapped into this. Part of my passion previously did a lot of work with bringing women into finance and women into tech. And then also I became a UK STEM ambassador, bringing that to schools, into the state schools in the UK, to teach kids about technology and innovation, what roles there are, what different opportunities there are, and how this works in day to day, and what kind of things were being built with technology. Because I think that part of the issue was the lack of education and this feeling that there was somebody in a basement with no windows coding, and that was what innovation and technology was, and not understanding that you have people like me in policy, or people like you, or marketing, or all sorts of different things. So incredibly interesting people now building on the blockchain all sorts of useful infrastructure. So that was part of what I did. So I always had that community side of what I did. I had the TradFi, and then of course the policy innovation side. So for me, when this role came up with Stand with Crypto, I was like, this is absolutely the trifecta. This is the sweet spot for me, where I get to, because I understand where we were. And for me, I feel that means I feel that I am more of an advocate than somebody who was born into it now. So you and I know what it was like before. And a lot of people that know what it was like before don't want that to change because they're afraid of that change. But when you come into it and you say, I know what that was like and I want this change, you're a real advocate. I wasn't born into this. I was born into a different world, and I understand how much better this is than what we've had before. I'm not saying that it replaces everything, but this addition to how we did things brings more people to the table, brings more innovation, brings more cross-border products. So that's what brought me to Stand with Crypto. I'll just bring out that in between, I was doing some work with Founders for Schools, and that was also working. I was a London rep with the state schools, with the most free school meals, and I would bring in someone from industry and someone from a university to talk about what roles there were in cyber, in digital assets, in crypto, in blockchain, in data. And kids were just fascinated by what's available. And I felt that talking to these kids and going to these meetings and going to schools, that there's still so many people that aren't aware that's why this Stand with Crypto role was so incredibly important for me, to bring everything that I've had. I know I've worked for it, but it's also luck that I could see how important this was. So bring all that to the table and to share it, and then to bring that voice to the table of the policymakers.
I love the blend of the previous professional experience, which you had aplenty, you're all over the world, with something that is deeply full of purpose, like transforming financial services, which is what crypto is mostly doing. In your recent experience, and I'm going to angle this towards more use cases. What were the use cases that helped in your mind cement that this is what you want to do and this is how you want to tackle merging these two industries? I know stablecoins are somewhat of a killer app for crypto at the moment, but what in their use, or even broader than stablecoins, that have made you convinced that this is the path forward for you professionally?
So, I mean, there's different stages of my journey. And I guess, like I said at the beginning, it was really the securitized products. And it was really dissecting what happened in 2007, 2008 with margin, which was one of the problems for Lehman, and then with securitization, and how with something on the blockchain, with these things on the blockchain, so not specifically, not only talking about crypto, but blockchain in general, how different the world could have been. And looking at that reduction in friction, faster, 24/7. We are cross-border. We're a more global economy. Regardless of how many people want to put that genie back in the box, it is how it works. We're a very international family. My family's in New York. I'm American and British. I'm Palestinian and Cuban. My son was born in Japan. My husband is German. I have family all over the world. If you want to buy something, if you want to transfer funds or anything like that, it is days. I'm doing this something with someone in Dubai, and getting the money there, it takes days, it's expensive. And also living in Asia, seeing how many people were working in Asia, say in Singapore, that were trying to send money home, Filipinos or whatever, and how expensive it was for them and how long it took, and the checks that they had to go through for sending money. It wasn't like just opening an account, it wasn't borrowing, it wasn't loans, it was nothing. It was just sending. You were leaving out a whole huge portion of the population that actually works out of infrastructure, after financial services. Looking at my kids, if they wanted to get onto the ladder of buying anything, so looking more tokenized things, of getting into the stock market, incremental, not possible, right? You were either all in, you were a corporate, or you were super wealthy. What happened to the huge population outside of that? So, like I said, there were stages for me. I've always been somebody who protests for justice, who's doing all these things, literally, flag carrying. But from a corporate point of view, it was, life is faster, easier, cheaper. Margin were getting narrower. When I was trading, interest rates were at 16%. We made a lot of money. It was, the huge spreads. As time progressed, those margins are narrower, but expenses were higher and higher and higher. So in policy, I was also working a lot with RegTech, with the FCA, with the Bank of England, and the cost of doing things was incredibly expensive. But doing the stuff on the blockchain with crypto, with digital assets, tokenized, it was reducing the cost and allowing the banks to actually have more, if you look at it from the corporate perspective, from the TradFi perspective, to have more of a margin that they could share then with their customers, making things easier. As that progressed, like I said, it became more about financial inclusion, digital identities, cross-border payments. And then now I look at, with crypto, and we can talk a little bit about our campaign on stablecoins in the UK. I went to a founders roundtable collecting evidence to provide to the House of Lords, and hearing what they were building was mind-blowing. And I need to come up with a new phrase because I use that all the time, but I don't really know what else to say, because and people said, well, what was so exciting they were building? And I was like, you know what? It isn't that it was like this groundbreaking thing, but it was something that made so much sense. It was things like, wrapping insurance around a smart contract, digital wills, so things cannot be changed. And then there are smart contracts. If certain time passes or whatever, things can be put into place. Telecoms, transport, energy, like Fuse Energy, right? One of the biggest energy companies now. One of them that I thought was fascinating, I was speaking in Manchester, and I didn't realize, when medicine is made at a pharmaceutical company, between that and delivery to the hospital or the doctors, wherever it's going to be distributed, there is a big black market where that medicine is swapped out for a placebo or something that could potentially be dangerous, or obviously dangerous because the person taking it could help them to live longer or healthier, and swapped out so that they can sell that on the black market. This is traceable from beginning to end. Things like that, unbelievable. Really, really useful. On the corporate side, again, I'm bouncing around a little bit, but we worked at Credit Suisse. We worked with the Swiss National Bank, the Banque de France, and Helvetia on wholesale CBDCs. And just because you want to do digital bonds, why are we still issuing bonds the way we're issuing them previously? Why not do these things digitally? Why not make it easier? Repo, which is something that I traded. When you have a basket, when these things are swapped out immediately, when you're doing, intraday repo, intraday margin. So there are a lot of different buckets in my head of why this is important. So it is what I see the builders now building, what I've seen, how it can help the traditional finance, and then how it can help the global population, the people that don't really have a voice at the table, that are sort of trying to make ends meet, that should be able to do what they need to do. They're working hard to transfer funds, to get out, to be able to take out loans on the blockchain, to be able to trace things, to be part of the global economy.
I love that. Now, I'm a sucker for use cases, and I think it's the most obvious way to demonstrate the power of the technology is not to talk about it, but show what it's actually solving for. And I love that you have a long list of that. Now, let's flash forward to more present day. I mean, I met you around 22, 23, probably around the time Sam Bankman-Fried was ruining the market without the blockchain, actually, just randomly. And then you went on to do so many other things in this space. And I ran into you about a month ago at Paris Blockchain Week, which was lovely. And you had me on your walk-in ambush interview, I want to say, for the record. But it was lovely. And I was really happy to kind of reacquaint and rekindle this. So what exactly is Stand with Crypto, and what is your role in this organization?
So I'm going to just back up a little bit because you mentioned Sam Bankman-Fried, and I was at Credit Suisse at the time, and I remember speaking, and it was the ECB and the Commission at something in Frankfurt, and explaining that it had nothing to do with crypto or blockchain, that it was fraud, that it was, complete lack of any governance structure in place, that it could have been anything. But because it was unregulated, which is why, we would like it, because it was able to work outside of those perimeters, then this is what happened. But that had nothing to do. There was nothing wrong with the protocols at all. And interestingly enough, people from the Commission and the ECB completely understood that. It was more the banks, the financial, they were the ones that were like, no, this is a big problem. And I don't know if that's fear or lack of education, but actually the ECB and the Commission understood that that was not an issue of the underlying technology. And that's, it always gets the blame. That is part of, so Stand with Crypto, part of what I want to do with Stand with Crypto is to educate people, because surprisingly, there's still a huge number of people that don't understand how it works, even in our industry. So Stand with Crypto is an organization. It's a grassroots organization that brings together the voices of their advocates, or represents our advocates. So in the UK, we have about 285,000 advocates now. And in the EU, we only launched on December 3rd in Brussels in the EU. And we have over 45,000 advocates now. And we bring their voice to the table of the policymakers. So we don't do that because we found that they didn't really have representation. So you'll have, the banks will have it through the trade associations like AFME or UK Finance, or, whatever is digital finance in the EU, but nothing for the people that are actually building, that are actually using the stable coins, that are actually using crypto day to day, the users of it. It doesn't have to be a founder or a builder. It can just be somebody who is day to day using it. What frictions do you find? What issues do you have? What are these decisions that are being made for you and policy when you are the people, when we have whatever percentage, I mean, it was 12, a little bit lower now in the UK, but that percentage, which is growing, are not being taken into account or into consideration when policies and when regulations are being put into place. So that's what I do. Harry and I represent these people and bring that to the table. So our last campaign in the UK, which was, we were really proud of, we launched a petition in September. The Bank of England said that they wanted to put a cap on stablecoins of £20,000 for individuals and 10 million for corporates. We launched a campaign for a pro-innovation blockchain. So it wasn't just stablecoins, but pro-innovation blockchain, asking for a digital a guru, like a digital representative, digital asset representative, like what now Chris Willard is going to do, that we are so excited about, because I worked with Chris when he was at the FCA, head of the Innovation Lab, and he is absolutely the perfect person to do this because he understands from a regulatory perspective and working with the banks, really understands, that, and is always willing to listen. We launched this petition in September. It was closing on March 3rd. And we wanted to get to 100,000 signatures. And at that point, at 100,000, Parliament would consider a debate, which is what we wanted to do. We wanted to open it. So we had 85,000 or 84,000 odd of our advocates signed this petition. What was really sort of fantastic and wonderful to see was that at the end of January, so it closed on March 3rd, at the end of January, when we reached about 65,000, the House of Lords launched an inquiry, which was really unusual on stablecoins specifically, because that was what our campaign was mostly about, was this, this cap, that it was going to push businesses and founders offshore, if they did that. And our concern was that they were not taking into account the businesses, and the UK is made up, 95% is made up from small businesses, and a lot of them are using stable coins. So we wanted to make sure that they understood the repercussions. And also to have the discussion with us, with the founders, with the builders, that the concern was of monetary risk and pushing of flight deposit risk. And when we found that in the US, it went from 30 billion to 300 billion, and actually deposits increased because people use stable coins for a different reason than use deposits. And it's only a fraction of the deposit market anyway at 300 billion. But if that grows, I understand, but there are guardrails that could be put in place, and to actually have this ex ante, to start with this limit and then say, well, we'll wait and see what happens, and if there isn't an issue, then we'll remove it. That becomes a little bit more difficult. Our point was, let's start without it, put some guardrails in place, and then if we see that there are any problems created, we can then, pull back. But at 60,000, this House of Lords launched the inquiry and started to call people in. And the first two that they had, one was a professor and one was someone from the FT. And I was so shocked at some of the comments that they made, which was that it's not necessary. We have no idea what the purpose is of blockchain, of crypto, of stable coins. And I thought, I don't understand how this is 2026 in this conversation. Some of the things that they were saying was generally they're still living in a bubble and not understanding where the world is going. And just because you don't want it to happen doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And just because you bury your head in the sand doesn't mean it's not happening around you. What it does mean is that you're not at the table helping to build how that moves forward. So they had, I think the two least pro were the first to speak in the inquiry. So this went on, and I think last week or the week before, they had two people from the FCA and somebody from the Bank of England in the inquiry, and then we convened this roundtable of founders, and with Superteen actually convened it for us, and I did it with Chrissy Hill. We co-moderated, co-chaired this roundtable. We had about 30 founders came and spoke about the fact that they would build offshore, or some of them were already going to the Isle of Man because it was easier, that a 20,000 cap was impossible, that they were not using this as deposit. They were using it for cross-border payments, for treasury, for all sorts of different use cases. So we collected that information and provided evidence. And when we asked them, and Super did the same thing, and we asked them to do the same, to provide evidence. And then somebody asked me, well, how do you know that the House of Lords actually convened this because of your petition? Because they wrote to every single person that signed our petition and asked them for input and to provide evidence. So they were listening, which was great. So we'll see what happens now. I mean, the Bank of England is now reconsidering, and we'll see where it leads. What we wanted was to make sure that their voices were heard, and that we didn't make some rash decisions, which in the end didn't make sense, and that we would hurt the largest community that we had. And also, I mean, some of our largest advocates are sort of in Poplar and Limehouse, and we have a big Bangladeshi Muslim community that transfers a lot of money overseas. So even there, if you've got a business and you want to pay payments cross-border, it's expensive. It takes a lot of time, where this is pennies and seconds. Why wouldn't you allow this in a more open way?
I think your remark on 2026 and people are still choosing to be ignorant about this is quite something, especially if you're like in any cross sector, whether in finance or policy or technology or geopolitics. Like if you're ignoring this forcefully, it tells a lot about the worldview in that capacity, and it's pretty scandalous to me that that's the case.
It's a real shame. I have to say, I remember someone, a head of FX, said to me once, I said, we need to talk about DeFi. We were talking to the BIS about different projects, and they're like, absolutely not. And I said, you can put your head in the sand, but this is happening. And so this is when I was at a bank, and it's like, or we can figure out how we work with it and sit at the table and develop it. But happen it is. And to me, the thing that, like you said, scandalous, this is like the most exciting thing since the Industrial Revolution. The time that we're living in, the opportunities there are. I have 3 boys, and one of them is actually set up seed legals for the US, and the other one is a hedge fund, and another one's in school. And they're like, yeah, Mom, it was so much easier back in your day. I was like, well, back in my day, there weren't really any women in banking, but we kind of just got on with it. So from that perspective, yes, but you did have to have an MBA or this, that, and the other, and you had to go into a linear path of the type of role that you would have. It was engineering, lawyer, doctor, whatever, banking. Whereas now you can build anything, you can do anything, and you can fail fast, which was not really acceptable back then. You can try things out, and the opportunities that we have now, this is so exciting. And to not want to, at least to say, this, I mean, do they think the genie goes back in the bottle? I don't understand. And how can you not be so excited about it? This stuff also, you need to, NFTs, it's like at the time I'm like, whatever, or meme coins, things like that. And you just think, whatever, you guys want to do that and it helps somebody. That's fine. You got to try a lot of stuff, right?
That's the fail fast thing you're just talking about, right? We had
100%.
So many waves in crypto since I joined. The first was just, different cryptocurrencies, and the point where if you wanted to build a new cryptocurrency, you needed a new blockchain. Then Ethereum came about, and then the ICOs came about because now there's programmable money. And then DeFi, and then NFT, and then DeFi again, and then stablecoins, and now regulations catching up. So you can do things, and I love your take on it. From your recent efforts, as you were describing, what has been most successful, and what are the things that you guys are still working on? Because I understand the role of advocacy and the role of trade associations to push the agenda for the industry forward, to make sensible decisions possible across legislators, regulators, the industry in general. What are the things that you're still struggling to push across that the status quo has yet to catch up to? And why are they not responding?
I just joined at the end of November, and I've got a lot of ideas, and knee deep into this campaign, which, Stand With Crypto had started very successfully. But I'm looking at this. There's 2 things, right, we're doing. One is the campaign. So our next campaign is going to be, on transfer restrictions. So right now, you have a bank account and you want to transfer to a registered crypto exchange, and your bank either says no. So the cooperative bank last week came out and said, no, my money, my choice, or they restrict it, they either ban it, they restrict it, or there's some other issues without really having to have any explanation. So that is, acting as a regulator. And, when the crypto exchanges are actually, some regulated businesses, and also following anti-money laundering and, all AML requirements and adhering to all of that. And they are allowed to do this business, but you're stopped from doing that. That's our next campaign. But on the side of that is this education piece, which I would like to do, which is I want to collect this bank of use cases to bring to parliaments, to bring to schools, to bring to the larger community, to bring to regulators, to showcase what is being built, why it's useful. Because I still think, Maurizio, and I think, it sounds really basic, but it is a lack of education and understanding. And I'm going to keep banging my head against the wall until people understand that this isn't gaming, this isn't risk taking, this isn't, I'm not saying that that people don't take risk or whatever, but that's like with anything, right? That's like with your cash. You can go to the casino, whatever. But then on the other side, you use money to invest in infrastructure. So things like transferring funds, it's via crypto is more traceable. And it's that point that people still think, it's not traceable. It's all, dangerous. We can't, not true. So it is that education. It is a lack of education that I'm finding the most difficult, but that's fine. So we will, like I said, 2 lines, which is one. So right now is to ask the banks to please, they let so our advocates and people that want to sign up as an advocate will be able to, go onto the website and to pre-populated letter, but they can drop down and send it to the right department and send to their bank and say, you have to explain to me why you're not allowing me to do something with my money, and we understand that there's issues with fraud, whatever, but they're not sharing with the crypto exchanges what those fraud cases are, because some of the crypto exchanges are saying that they find that's a very small percentage. So if that information isn't being shared and we can't build it together, then it's just being anti-competitive. And it's just trying to shut it out. And the issue is that people are just going to go and do it somewhere else. So I guess education is the biggest barrier, and this inability to understand that it's happening and that we need to move forward. Like I said, my view is that we will have two roles. One is a campaign, and a very specific campaign. So in the EU, our campaign right now is on giving back the 4% rewards, basically, that pre-MiCA were given. So that is not given. We're not talking about from the issuers, but from the crypto exchanges themselves that would give rewards in different ways that would come from their own platform, that they would give it to the customer. And post MiCA, that was banned. But we would like, now that MiCA review is coming up, we would like that to be allowed. This doesn't take money away from anybody else. This isn't interest. This is actually rewards back to the customer. So we do our activations, our campaigns, signing petitions, doing guerrilla campaigns, but then also bringing in founders, users to talk about why they use it, to show that it's not scary. Because I still think a lot of people think it's scary, and I think that's a lack of education.
I mean, that's the whole reason of me doing the show to begin with, is it's education.
Which is fantastic. I love it.
In terms of your own day-to-day, and I've been asking this for guests because I'm very health aware, even though sometimes I don't pay a lot of attention or don't take good care of myself, but I'm health aware. And you're a mom of 3, working in an industry that doesn't stop. How do you keep yourself healthy and sane?
Iyengar yoga. I've been doing that since I moved to Japan in 1995. And it's the only time that I can shut off. Because I think yoga was originally designed so that people would be able to meditate, because you have to focus on what you're doing. And I find that now it's moving towards a yoga with fast yoga and everything else, which I'm not a Puritan when it comes to finance or anything else, but when it comes to yoga, I'm very much none of this new crap, so hot yoga, all that kind of stuff, but where you have to, it's the only time I can't meditate. I can't sit. My mind is always going a million miles an hour, thinking about 100 different things I have to do or want to do. But that just makes me stop, especially Iyengar, where you have to really focus on pulling this up and, holding this and doing that. I have to be very intentional with what I do. That is it. And then I have to say, probably one of the most relaxing theater and things like that I did was my son flew over from New York yesterday morning to take me to the Atletico Arsenal game last night. That was unbelievable. It was not really relaxing, but I had this calm afterwards. I have to say that was because Arsenal beat Atletico, and I think he told me I was one of the 50,000 fans that walked out of the Emirates Stadium going into the finals of the Champions League. Yeah. So that was very exciting. And then, of course, yeah. But I think, yoga and I have very good friends, dinner parties, bouncing things off people. I don't have a perspective that I can only have my view. So I bounce things off a lot of people, listening to a lot of podcasts, things like that. But yoga, I think, is my most relaxing. As far as healthy goes, green tea, a lot of green tea. Good
recipe. You mentioned you went to art school?
In Singapore, I own 2 bars. I set up 2 bars after I left Merrill. I set up a business for Richard Branson. And when I came back to the UK, so I realized that I'd been traveling so much for work. I mean, I'd been in finance since I was 17. And then I was global product manager at Merrill and traveling all over the world and going to museums and all this, which I absolutely love, museums and concerts and all that. But didn't really understand a lot of it. It was just going in and out. So I signed up for a 2-year art degree at Christie's, but not to do art, to learn about it. So it was from, Mesopotamian to a sort of modern day. And I went to Catholic school my whole life, didn't know anything about religion until I went to Christie's, because you learned art through history and religion. And it was absolutely two of the most fascinating years of education I've ever had. I spent most of my time at the British Museum in the first year and the National Gallery the second year, and then we go to trips to Rome and Paris. And that was going to a museum, going to see an exhibition I liked. I find that incredibly inspiring, relaxing, and wonderful. My son's best friend is a concert violinist. We went to listen to him and his girlfriend play at Cadogan Hall. That was Sibelius. We had some issues at work I was trying to figure out what the answer was to. And it was listening to the music, and it became so clear. It just really just landed. I was like, I know exactly what to do. And I wasn't thinking about it. But in the back of my head, with the music playing, it was just, this is what we have to do. So yeah, that's a long answer because I had to think about it. I wasn't sure.
I love that. Now, before I let you go, for the listeners who kept on with us until the end, what would you like them to take away from our conversation today?
Don't take no for an answer. This is all happening. You are part of sometimes it's going to be tough. You're going to come up against roadblocks, but this is I think that the innovation and the digital assets and all the stuff we're working at is like water. It will find a different stream to go down. Educate yourself, always keep up, read a lot. There's so much material now, whether it's on X or LinkedIn, podcasts like yours, follow people, just stay educated and up to date. And just, it's not a linear path. And if you're a student, which is what a lot of the people that I talk to, it is not a linear path. So just, the doors only open if you go to a new door because the other one didn't open, and just learn all the time.
Adriana, this was really, really cool to learn more about you and your journey and where your mind is. And thank you for the work you do. I think it's an important part of the industry that sometimes goes unnoticed. And I'm super happy that you're the one doing it, because
thank you.
It has to come from someone with the grit and the background that, speaks to the people that we have to engage with. So thank you so much.
And the refusal to take no for an answer.
Be the stubborn.
Absolutely. And listen, like I said, Cuban Palestinian from New York. No, it is not. No, it's not in my vocabulary. Maurizio, obrigado.
No, that was great. De nada. Catch us online. We're on Instagram at BlockTalks Podcast, on Twitter at BlockTalksPod or 0x Mauricio. We're on Lens at blockdrops.lens. We have a newsletter on LinkedIn. Write to us at blockdropspodcast@gmail.com, and you can listen to the BlockDrops podcast at Spotify, iColab, Faberbund Tech, and all of the other major streaming platforms. Yay! Shout out to Adriana for her restless support for crypto. Don't forget to leave the ratings on your favorite player and check out the merch store at blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird, LFJ.